Oh, have trouble falling asleep at night? I got a surefire way to help you out. And give you some D&D ideas as well. So, I don't know if everyone is like this or what percentage of people are like this, but you're going to bed, you're trying to fall asleep, and you got all these things running through your head, all these obligations and financial problems and things you want to do with your property or things you want to do in life or whatever's running through your head that's keeping you from falling asleep. And I use Dungeons and Dragons to help me with that. And then that helps with my Dungeons and Dragons. So I'll get to the final part at the end of the video. But what led me here was when I was on the road. I'm a trucker, and I used to do a lot of long distance trucking. And the times shift between when you need to be awake and when you need to be asleep and that kind of stuff, depending on where your deliveries are, and you're going through like several time zones to get there, and time is just loosey goosey, and you've got to figure out how to fall asleep and get your 8 hours, and then within 10 hours get back to trucking, right? So one of the methods I started to use, I don't even know how I stumbled across this, but maybe it was just, I'm having all these thoughts and they're all pressing issues or even old thoughts that I haven't resolved yet and that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, I need to think about something that doesn't matter at all. And every time my mind tries to go into something that does matter, something that is going to energize me and, maybe get my adrenaline going and keep me from falling asleep, I need to go to something that doesn't matter and make my mind go right back to that every time I get pulled from into a thought that does matter. And it needed to be boring enough that I would fall asleep, right? So I thought to myself, what would a sequel to the Twilight series be? Because that doesn't matter at all. I don't care. So I just started thinking about that for every night for weeks, months. And then, while I was playing a campaign with my friends Sean and Chris, I started thinking to myself, well, I've kind of fleshed out this campaign world, and I've kind of fleshed out the story they're doing. They do things, and then the story changes or it morphs around with the choices that they make. And the world itself is still doing what the world is doing while they're not there. And so this is the part where it improves your Dungeons and Dragons. You got to think about the things in your world that are going on while your player characters aren't there. Because if they go from one place to another place and do a bunch of things, but then they come back, because they often have some sort of home base or some things they got to do with the story that brings them back to a previous place. Those people that are there have to have been doing something in the meantime. Something must have been going on, right? They can't just be standing there like NPCs waiting for more inputs from the PCs. This is not a video game. And even in video games, I think that there's some sort of continuation of things going on to some degree, depending on, what level of game you're playing. But I started then to think about my campaign world, and I started from the very beginning, from the genesis of the universe, right? And came up with, how the universe was created and how it splintered off into these different things. And I actually might do a series on what my campaign world is. I don't think it's a thing that would get any sort of views or whatever, because one of the things in Dungeons and Dragons that a lot of people talk about is don't tell people about your campaign world. No one wants to hear about your campaign world. But people like to talk about it, and maybe I might bring it up. Anyway, the point is, as I was going to sleep, I would think about the genesis of the universe in this campaign world and how these things, basically the different realms, the different gods, the different, the planes, how the planes came to be, and how the prime material plane came to be, and then how this world came to be, and how the world was peopled, and the animals and the monsters and all that kind of stuff, right? And this kind of thing can take a lot of time, right? And if you were to do this, just writing it down, during your regular activities, it would be pretty time consuming. But the time that you do have is that time before going to sleep. And if you use that time period to think about your campaign world and how it was created and what gods and peoples and that kind of stuff and how it fits within the Dungeons and Dragons multiverse or whatever, you start to come up with these ideas, but these ideas don't really matter. They're not energizing enough to keep you awake, right? At least in my experience. So eventually you fall asleep, and then you pick up your thought line the next day, and maybe you'll forget some things, but some things will kind of stick in your mind, and you'll build on it, and what I discovered was that eventually I was able to think of a timeline that would be millions of years long, of the creation of the world, until I get to a place where it's peopled and there's empires and there's different tribes and there's different regions and all this other stuff. And this stuff is actually stuck in my mind. And in the meantime, while I'm playing the campaign, and this is the part that improves your Dungeons and Dragons, while I'm thinking about the stuff that my friends have done or whatever, I'm also thinking about, not just the history and geology of the world and how it's come to be, but what's happening in that moment in different regions, in different areas where the characters have been. And so when my characters return to some village that they had spent a lot of time in, just to give you a backstory, they kind of came through this area after fleeing one village, and they came through a mountain region, discovered a secret tower that's shrouded in sort of like a cloaking type thing, because it's in a pocket dimension, right? So then nearby is a village, and that's where they kind of began their adventuring path, and they moved along this road through a mountain pass and eventually cleared it of all the monsters that had sort of crumbled what little trade was between this village and the next largest city. And when they got to this next largest city, they were able to basically claim that strip of mountain pass as an exclusive trade territory for themselves, and they were basically creating their own little kingdom from the very beginning. And then they discovered, how to use a portal in a dungeon that brought them to another dungeon halfway across the world, or on a smaller continent off the coast of the larger continent. And they spent a lot of time in that area. And when they came back, things had changed. They'd been gone for, I don't know, it was 6 months to a year. Actually, it was about 3 to 6 months, and then they decided, or the mage decided to put a portal on their spelljamming ship that they had been using to travel, so that it would connect to the portals in these different dungeons. And that requires a certain level of gems, but also a year's time, and he decided to do that. So then, before I went to sleep at night, I had already thought of what was going on in this region, and then all I had to think of was what's going on a little bit further into the future, a year, and where those people would be at when my friends returned. And so they return, and the situation has changed. There's someone else that's messing up the situation. There's the people that the NPCs that had been adventuring with them had become sort of the commanders of a local militia that was fighting off this other person, and some refugees that they had rescued. Among them was this wealthy aristocrat lady who had been handling their finances for no pay and was quite irritated at them. And just these are things that I thought of before going to sleep, and because they were not all that important, they weren't stressful in any way. I was very calm thinking about them, and therefore I was able to fall asleep, and I was able to figure out the little things that were going on in my campaign world. And so I think it's the best of both worlds. I often think about that, or I think about some sci-fi stories that I'm going to write, or I think about other things that are more creative, the things that I'm going to do that are creative. And what's very key is your mind wants to go to these stressful things because they're stressing you out, but you can't deal with them yet. And so what you need to do is, before going to bed, is you stop thinking about those things and then start thinking about the calm things, the things that don't matter as much, the things that are fun. And anytime you feel your mind slip into this other thought about the stressful thing, you pull it back and you go back to the Dungeons and Dragons campaign, the sequel to Twilight, anything that isn't stressful, basically. And you can do this, and you can train your mind to do this by continually doing it. So at first, you will fail quite a bit, and you'll keep going back to these stressful thoughts, but you need to recognize that's happening and then pull your mind back and go back to the unstressful thoughts. And you keep doing it over and over again throughout the night, and then the next night, and the next night, and the next night. And after about a few weeks of this, you become better at it. And then after a few months, it becomes pretty simple that you instantly recognize you're going to a contemporary thought, and then you go instead to thoughts about Dungeons and Dragons, thoughts about a sequel that doesn't matter. And, I've been doing this for years now, and sometimes I still slip, and because there's a lot of stuff on my plate right now. I'm running a store, I got a job that I work 50 to 70 hours a week at, and I need to stop thinking about those things before going to bed, because I can think about those things during the day when I'm wide awake, right? And I just basically am able now to recognize when I'm having one of those thoughts, and I've been pulled into this rabbit hole of stressful thoughts, and to basically pull myself out and go over to the nice calm hole and just think about things that I like. And then also I get to improve my Dungeons & Dragons campaign. I get to improve the experience that my players have had, because they know that the world is dynamic and it's moving and things are going on regardless of whether they do things, right? And I think it's the best of both worlds. So if you want to take this idea and run with it, by all means, I think everybody should do this. And if you're not someone who plays Dungeons and Dragons, whatever your hobby is, try to only think about things about your hobby, and don't think about things that are stressful before going to bed, and I think that you'll improve your sleep. So with that, let me know what you think in the comments below, and whether you think I should do a full outline of my campaign world. And have a good day, have a good rest.